Welkom terug. Nou kyk, die navorser van Africa Check, Keegan Leech, kuier vanoggend by ons en ons is selfs oor twee spesifieke partye se manifeste en om meer uit te vind waarvoor staan hierdie politieke partye. Nou, ons praat gereeld oor die feit dat jy nie net stem natuurlik vir 'n leier nie, maar jy stem vir 'n party en dit is belangrik om natuurlik die navorsing na te gaan. Good morning, Keegan, and welcome.
Good morning, nice to be here.
Let me start with asking who and what is Africa Check and what is your work in relation to the upcoming election?
Well, we're a fact-checking organization, the first independent fact-checking organization in Africa. So that means that if you say something in public, on the news, on social media, in your press releases or your statements, then it's fair game for us to go check whether everything you've said is correct.
Wow.
Obviously, with the election coming up, we want to make sure that people are voting for a party based on accurate information. You don't want to vote for a party based on claims that you later find out aren't true. And we've partnered this year with a number of media organizations to form a coalition and try and spread our work out a little bit and try and help each other to sort of check a little bit more than we could just as Africa Check alone.
I don't think people realize, but how much misinformation is out there?
There's a lot because not everyone, well, absolutely everyone gets it wrong sometimes. Everyone makes mistakes. As well-meaning as you might be and as hard as you might try, everyone falls for misinformation or shares something without checking it or makes a mistake even when they're, really trying their best. It's only human.
Well, and we get that a lot, I must admit, here, where people say you don't have any clue what you're saying. You're all wrong because the Earth is the center of the universe. How do you make sure that you don't get things wrong? I mean, for the average Joe out there, where do we go to? What do we do to double check that the facts that we think are real are real?
Well, one good thing that you can do is just be a little bit more careful. So look out for things that stir strong emotions in you, or even as simple as it sounds, that sound too good to be true. Because often those are the kinds of claims that we're less inclined to check, the things that make us angry or really excited or fearful or something like that. Those strong emotions take control, and it stops us from pausing and thinking and going back to the source of the information to find out where it comes from and whether it's trustworthy.
Is the Earth flat?
No.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
But that's true because very often, and we see it a lot on, for example, Facebook or WhatsApp messages, someone gets a message from a video going, oh, this politician did this, and just listen to the words. One, it's taken out of context most of the time, and then they start sending it on, and before you see it, it's like spread everywhere. And you're quite right that I don't think we ever go back to the source. Very few people, and that was nice that you said, very few people go, okay, where's the original video? So let me watch the speech in context to understand what actually was being said or not. But how hard is it to sometimes find that source?
It can be quite difficult, and sometimes the best thing to do is to just, if you're unsure about something, not share it. You don't necessarily need to go all the way back to the source and find out exactly what's going on. If something raises red flags, just not passing it on can stop that chain where it goes from you to someone else, and each person is thinking, well, I trust Pierre, so he would have checked it before he shared it on to me, and then it gets passed on to the next person, and before you know it, everyone has shared something that none of them have actually checked out.
Before we get to the manifestos that we're going to be speaking about today, is this what you guys are doing? Because you said you're the first independent fact-checking organization in Africa, correct?
Yep.
That I find that incredible. We know a lot of elections are coming up in Africa also and right across the world. Is your work mainly based in South Africa at the moment, or would you branch out to help other countries too?
Well, we've got offices in 4 countries, so South Africa, obviously, but also Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal. And we try and foster fact-checking by helping and collaborating with other fact-checking organizations in other countries. But we really do focus on specifically the countries in which we work, and only sort of on the margins other countries based on what information is being passed around.
Is fact-checking something that happens worldwide? So we have the American elections coming up. Will they also have similar organizations over there to actually do some fact-checking?
Absolutely. And a lot of the fact-checking organizations that people might have heard of are international organizations like PolitiFact and things like that. One of our partners in our coalition is AFP Fact Check, who obviously don't operate only in South Africa, but have offices all around the world.
I think it's something you should be so careful when you do fact checking as well, because people will interpret it as you are now just disrespecting my political favorites. Do you get a lot of that?
We try to avoid anything that could make us look biased or look like we have a particular favorite. And part of the important thing to acknowledge here is that everyone does get it wrong. Even your particular political favorite, even if you think that they're not trying to deliberately mislead you or present you with something incorrect, if they're trying really hard, they're not experts in everything. And so it's very easy for them to slip up and include something that's incorrect or out of context. Because as you'll see, some of these claims can get quite complicated and quite difficult to understand at times.
Why do you think people do not read like the political manifestos?
That's a good question. Considering it's my job to read them, I know that they can be quite difficult. It can be, you know, the EFF manifesto is very long this year. And sometimes if you have a particular issue that you care about a great deal, you will go check out just what the party says about that. But reading through a full manifesto takes a lot of time and it's a lot of effort. And then to go on and fact check every claim you come across for yourself is exhausting, which is why we hope that the work we do takes some of that load off ordinary people.
And you're going through all the manifestos, right?
Yes, we haven't published reports on all of them yet, but there is still a little while to go before the election. So if you check out our website, africacheck.org, you'll see the new reports that we publish on each different manifesto as we publish them.
Oh.
Does someone check you after you fact check something? Is it like a team that works on a manifesto, for example, or does it, for example, just come like on your board and you'll plate, there it is, okay, Keegan's checking the EFF manifesto and only you're in control of it, or does someone help you?
No, it's not just me, it's a team effort. We're a pretty small team, but just like any news organization, we have editors and copy editors, and we work together if we're uncertain about something. So it's not just my eyes that have been on something. And after we've published our reports, we work in a way that tries to make it easy for anyone to repeat our work. So if you don't trust what we've said, then you can go and check us yourself by checking out all the sources we've referenced and making sure that we haven't misrepresented anything.
Ons sit ons gesprek voor saam met Keegan Leech en hy is natuurlik 'n navorser by Africa Check en ons gesels oor die manifeste van sekere politieke partye. En ons begin vanoggend sommer by Rise Mzansi. So I'm going to ask you, Keegan, what are some of the facts that you checked and what are some of your findings that you had?
Well, we checked a selection. We can't go through them all on air today, but there's a couple of interesting ones that I thought it would be fun to talk about. So, for example, one of Rise Mzansi's claims was that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And this is actually a claim that lots of people make. And it's an interesting one because it's a good look at how there might be more complexity behind a claim than it first appears. What are you looking at
when you're saying that? Yes.
Absolutely. In this case, we're looking at something called the Gini coefficient. It's the measure of inequality that's most commonly used. It's a number from 0 to 1, which represents sort of what the wealth distribution is in a country. If everyone owned the same amount of wealth, the Gini coefficient of that country would be 0. If one person owned all the wealth, it would be 1. South Africa's is about 0.63 or 0.67, depending on what measure you use. And that is higher than essentially every other country in most rankings of Gini coefficients. But
wow,
there's a bit of complexity to this because not every country is represented in those rankings. There's some countries, like some of the Gulf countries, which might have quite high wealth inequality, which aren't represented. And every country's data isn't necessarily perfectly comparable. So they're collected slightly differently using slightly different methods. And it means that not every country is going to have the same sort of standard for how that is measured. So we rated that claim mostly correct because it is accurate. Although, as a researcher from WITS told us, ideally what you should be saying is we're the most unequal country in the world for the countries which we have data.
Okay, so that's quite specific and that makes sense. Unemployment is worse now?
Yes. Unemployment is worse now than it was in 1994. Was that Rise Mzansi's claim?
Yes.
That's true. That's something that Stats SA collects data on pretty regularly, and unemployment rates have risen recently. There was obviously an unusual little blip during the COVID pandemic when unemployment actually dipped briefly, and that's just because the way Stats SA collects unemployment data, people who couldn't work were not counted. But unemployment is, as we know, quite high.
Another one that they made is there are more cases of food insecurity and hunger today than there were in 1994, also Rise Mzansi.
This is another complex one. The general trend for food insecurity and hunger is that the prevalence of both has decreased. There have been slight increases. Again, during the pandemic, there was a spike. But overall, if you take a slice of data from 20 years ago and a slice from today, hunger and food insecurity have dropped. And this was even the case in the sources that Rise Mzansi sent us to back up their claim. But we rated this unproven because while the general trend is for things falling, we can't say that this is outright false for two main reasons. The first is that they have talked about absolute numbers instead of prevalence, which isn't the standard. It's not how researchers who discuss this topic typically measure it, because it's possible for a small percentage of people to represent a large number when the population grows. But also, and more importantly, we don't have data going all the way back to 1994. Stats SA's General Household Survey started in 2002, and it doesn't quite reach back far enough. So we can't say for sure that even though hunger has fallen, it is definitely lower than it was in 1994.
Wow. Okay, so let's look at some of the EFF's claims. So their first claim was 80% of the population occupies less than 10% of South Africa's land.
That almost makes sense for an average oak like me. I mean, cities, you know?
That's a good thing to factor in there, because what land is actually built on is a tiny proportion of the country.
Yeah.
So something like 3% of South Africa's land is built up, which means urban areas and mines. But that's not what the EFF was actually concerned about. We fact-checked this in their 2019 manifesto as well, and at the time, they sent us their reasoning behind this. They explained that what they'd done was subtracted from South Africa's total land what they called white-owned agricultural land, state-owned land, and land owned by Indians. And they said that that left 14% of land to be owned by black and coloured South Africans. And that's inaccurate. The biggest issue there with their calculation is that they're using out-of-date and incorrect figures. Worst of all, the 67% of land that they called white-owned agricultural land was agricultural land as it stood in 1994.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, that's not relevant to land
changed,
today. The best land ownership data we have is unfortunately still a little bit old. It's from 2015. It was published in the 2017 Land Audit Report. It shows that there is a massive disparity in land ownership, but it's a bit more complicated, again, than the EFF has made it out to be. So we can only find out the race of the owner of a piece of land for a category of land called privately owned, individually owned land.
Individuals, yeah.
And that is mostly dominated in terms of sheer acreage by agricultural land. when it comes to agricultural land, black South Africans own about 4% of it compared to white South Africans who own 72%. So there is a massive disparity, but it's not quite what the EFF is presenting, and it's not quite the figures they're presenting. Even if we only look at that small slice of land, which is about 30% of all land, then either black South Africans own about 4%, or black and coloured South Africans, which is how the EFF presented it to us in 2019, own about 20%. So their numbers are off either way.
Okay.
Wow. Keegan, that's all we have for time for, unfortunately, but we'd love to have you back just to go over some of these facts. It really is
some of
interesting.
the other parties as well.
Yes,
Yes.
it really, really is very interesting to hear what you have to say about this. So thank you also for all your work you're doing, and for Africa Check and making sure that we know what the true facts are.
It's a pleasure.
Wow.